It all started on a humid, restless morning when I decided, in a moment of inspiration and maybe a little desperation, that I would master English in 50 days. For years I had stumbled over words, mispronounced sentences and avoided conversations with fluent speakers because I feared judgment. But that day, I was determined to change everything. At that point, I knew very little about English, and my vocabulary was limited. I could get by in basic conversations, but the more advanced expressions and the natural flow of the language were out of my reach. I had been frustrated for so long. I felt like I was watching everyone else effortlessly glide through their conversations while I was stuck, constantly second-guessing myself. So, I set a challenge. I would give myself 50 days to learn English. The idea seemed a bit overzealous, but I figured why not? If I was going to do this, I had to dive in head first. Day 1. The plan. I sat down and sketched out a plan. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be long hours, frustration, and moments when I'd want to give up. But I had decided to break it down into manageable steps, like climbing a mountain, one step at a time. Listening. I needed to immerse myself in English as much as possible. This would mean listening to English podcasts, watching English movies, and tuning into radio stations in English. Speaking. To build confidence, I would start by speaking with myself. Sounds odd, right? But I figured, if I didn't practice speaking aloud, how would I ever get comfortable with the rhythm of the language? Reading. I would read everything I could get my hands on. News articles, novels, blogs, anything to expand my vocabulary and get used to sentence structures. Writing. Writing would be my secret weapon. I would keep a journal in English, even if it was just a sentence or two each day. The key here was consistency. Days 2 to 7, drowning in new words. The first week was rough. I spent hours every day listening to podcasts like The English We Speak and watching English TV shows with subtitles. It felt like my brain was overloaded. I would hear words, write them down, and try to make sense of them. The problem was that when I heard these words in a conversation, I could never remember them. Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I still remember one particular day when I watched Friends and couldn't keep up with all the jokes and slang. What's going on? Why do they talk so fast? I thought. But there was something magical about the experience. I realized that the more I exposed myself to English, the easier it became to pick out familiar words, even when they were buried in rapid conversations. That week, I also started practicing speaking in the mirror. It felt silly at first, but I didn't care. I would stand there, repeat phrases I'd heard, and work on pronunciation. Every day I felt a bit less awkward. Days 8 to 14. The vocabulary explosion. The second week was a turning point. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. I started to understand the patterns of speech. I noticed that words and phrases I had learned were starting to stick. My vocabulary expanded rapidly. I would keep a small notebook with me at all times, jotting down words I didn't know and looking them up immediately. There was a moment that really made me proud. I had a short conversation with an English-speaking friend. It wasn't perfect, but I understood what they were saying, and I was able to express myself without feeling completely lost. That small victory fueled my motivation. On day 10, I felt confident enough to try reading a short story in English. It was slow at first, but with each page I felt my confidence growing. I would read aloud, which helped reinforce my pronunciation and rhythm. Days 15 to 21. Speaking out. Loud Week 3 was where I pushed myself to take my speaking practice to the next level. I joined an online English learning group. It was nerve-wracking at first. My heart raced as I waited for my turn to speak. But once I started, I was amazed at how much easier it became. My fear of speaking faded as I realized that mistakes were okay. Everyone made them. One of the most significant moments came when I had a conversation with a native English speaker. We talked about a topic I knew well: travel. At first, I stumbled over words, and I caught myself thinking, this is impossible. But instead of giving up, I kept going. I asked questions. I answered. Slowly, I felt the rhythm of the conversation flow more naturally. By the end, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I had just completed my first real conversation in English. Days 22-30. Confidence builds. By the fourth week, I could feel my confidence skyrocketing. I wasn't just listening to podcasts anymore. I was picking up new vocabulary with ease. I could hold conversations for longer periods. The fear I had felt when speaking to native speakers began to disappear. I was becoming fluent in the way I thought, not just in the way I spoke. I also realized that I had become addicted to learning. Every morning, I would wake up excited to learn something new. Whether it was a new idiom or a more natural way to express myself, I was driven. English was no longer something I had to do, it was something I wanted to do. Days 31-40. The deep dive. With 10 days left, I decided to immerse myself even deeper. I took a more serious approach to reading. No more children's books, I was going for novels. I picked up a copy of The Great Gatsby. The sentences were complicated, and I struggled at first. But I knew this was how I was going to improve. I read slowly, analyzing every word, and checked the dictionary for words I didn't know. The more I read, the more I felt my understanding of English deepen. Speaking to others became a regular part of my day. I would have coffee with friends and converse in English. The more I practiced, the more I realized that I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer translating my thoughts into English. I was thinking in English. Days 41-50. The final push. The last 10 days were a blur of productivity. It was as though everything I had done in the past month had been building up to this final stretch. I practiced speaking, reading, and writing non-stop. I even started to write longer pieces of text, like essays and short stories. I reflected on how far I had come, and the progress was incredible. The final day of my 50-day challenge arrived. I sat down to take a test to evaluate my progress. I could feel the nerves, but this time I felt prepared. The test was long, but I breezed through it. The English I had learned, the sentences I had formed, and the words I had mastered, everything felt like it had finally clicked. I was amazed. I had done it. In 50 days, I had gone from barely speaking English to holding confident conversations, reading novels, and writing essays. Of course, I wasn't perfect, but I could understand and express myself in a way I never thought possible. English wasn't just a language anymore. It was a part of me. The aftermath. Looking back, those 50 days were an intense, transformative experience. They weren't just about learning a language, they were about pushing myself to do something I once thought impossible. There were days when I felt like quitting, but I kept reminding myself of the goal, and that persistence paid off. Today, English has become an integral part of my life. I no longer fear speaking it. I have conversations, write articles, and even help others with their English. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every single minute. Learning English in 50 days wasn't a simple task, but it taught me a valuable lesson that with dedication, consistency, and the courage to make mistakes, anything is possible. Quarto Mini.